What are you doing here? You weren't invited yesterday." My daughter's fiancé yelled during the wedding I paid for, his face contorted with rage. I just smiled, hiding the pain of betrayal, and replied, "I'll leave, but first meet my special guest, your old friend." When he saw who it was, his eyes widened in horror, and he fainted. The revenge of justice had only just begun. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. The door slammed so hard the picture frames rattled on my living room wall. "Dad, I'm getting married!" Judy burst through the entrance, breathless and flushed, thrusting her left hand toward me like a weapon. The diamond caught the lamplight, throwing tiny rainbows across her face. I set down my coffee cup, the evening news still chattering from the television. "Congratulations, sweetheart. When did Gary—" "Last night, at that Italian place downtown." Her voice carried a sharp edge, defensive before I'd even responded. She pulled off her coat with jerky movements, dropping it over my armchair. "I know what you're thinking." "What am I thinking?" "That he's not good enough. That I'm rushing into things. That I should wait longer. Get to know him better, blah, blah, blah." She paced to the window, then spun back to face me. "Well, I'm 28 years old, Dad. I can make my own decisions." I studied her face, the tight smile, the way her fingers twisted around the ring. In 40 years of real estate deals, I'd learned to read people. The ones who talked fastest usually had the most to hide. "Have you set a date?" "June 15th. That gives us 2 months to plan everything." She moved to the couch, perching on the edge like she might bolt at any moment. "Gary wants something elegant, classy, the kind of wedding that makes a statement. 2 months is pretty quick for—" "We don't want to wait." The words exploded out of her. "Why should we? When you know, right? That's what you always said about Mom." The comparison stung because it wasn't accurate. Your mother and I dated for 3 years before we got engaged, but pointing that out would only make Judy angrier. "Where are you thinking of having it?" "The Fairmont. Gary has connections there." She smoothed her skirt, avoiding my eyes. "It'll be beautiful. About 200 guests." 200 guests at the Fairmont. I did quick mental math and didn't like the result. "That sounds expensive. It'll cost about 50,000, maybe 60. She finally looked at me directly, chin raised in challenge. "I know it's a lot, but this is my wedding, Dad. My one wedding. I want it to be perfect." There it was. The real reason for the dramatic entrance, the defensive attitude, the rushed timeline. Gary wanted an expensive wedding, and Judy wanted me to pay for it. $50,000. "You said you'd help when I got married. You promised Mom before she died that you'd give me a proper wedding?" Her voice cracked slightly. "Don't tell me you're going back on that promise now." She was right. I had promised Helen that. But Helen would have spent months getting to know Gary, asking questions, making sure he was worthy of our daughter. Helen would have seen through his charm in about 5 minutes. "Of course I'll help with the wedding." The words came out before I could stop them. "But maybe we could discuss the budget." "Thank you." She jumped up and kissed my cheek, her mood shifting so quickly it gave me whiplash. "Gary's going to be so excited. He's been worried about the money, trying to figure out how to make it work on his startup budget." Another red flag. What kind of man proposes to a woman when he can't afford to marry her? "Maybe I should take Gary out for dinner, get to know my future son-in-law better." "That would be great. He's been wanting to talk to you about his business ideas. He really respects successful entrepreneurs like you." She gathered her coat, suddenly eager to leave. I should go tell him the good news about the wedding budget. She was at the door before I could stand up. "Judy, wait." "Love you, Dad. Thank you for understanding." The door closed with a soft click, leaving me alone with the sound of the television and the echo of her words. I stared at the closed door for a long moment. The house felt too quiet, too empty. $50,000 for a wedding to a man I barely knew, for a daughter who'd become a stranger. I turned off the television and carried my coffee cup to the kitchen. The house felt different after Judy's whirlwind visit, charged with unspoken tensions and half-finished conversations. I rinsed the cup in the sink, going through the motions of my evening routine, while my mind replayed every word, every defensive gesture. The kitchen still smelled faintly of the casserole I'd heated for dinner, Helen's recipe, though I'd never mastered her technique with the seasonings. I wiped down the counters, straightened the dish towel, anything to keep my hands busy while my thoughts churned. $50,000. The number kept circling back, sharp-edged and demanding attention. I walked to my study, drawn by an impulse I couldn't name. The room held 20 years of accumulated life, business awards gathering dust, photo albums Helen had organized with military precision, tax returns filed in neat chronological order. I pulled one of the albums from the shelf, its leather binding soft with age. The photos told a different story than tonight's conversation. Here was Judy at 5, gap-toothed and giggling on my shoulders at Navy Pier. At 10, proudly displaying her science fair project on volcanoes. High school graduation, tears streaming down her face as she hugged us both. College move-in day, trying to look independent while secretly terrified. When had she become so brittle? So quick to assume I disapproved? Maybe I did disapprove. Gary Thompson had walked into our lives 6 months ago with his expensive suits and vague talk about disruptive technologies. He name-dropped investors I'd never heard of and spoken buzzwords that meant nothing. But Judy's eyes lit up when he talked, like she was witnessing genius instead of performance art. I flipped to Helen's favorite photo of the three of us from Judy's college graduation. We looked so complete then, so certain about the future. Helen had been gone 2 years now, but her absence still caught me off guard sometimes. She would have known how to handle tonight's conversation. Helen could have asked the hard questions without triggering Judy's defenses. The empty house pressed around me, filled with the weight of conversations Helen and I would never have, decisions I'd have to make alone. Parenting didn't end when your child turned 18. If anything, it got harder. At least when Judy was little, I could protect her from skinned knees and playground bullies. How do you protect a grown daughter from her own choices? My phone buzzed with a text message. Judy. Gary says dinner tomorrow night at 7. Angelo's on Rush Street? I stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, looking forward to it. Maybe I was being unfair. Maybe my protective instincts were clouding my judgment. Gary might be exactly what he seemed, a young entrepreneur in love with my daughter. The expensive wedding, the borrowed charm, the way he seemed to appear whenever money was being discussed. Maybe those were coincidences. I closed the photo album and returned it to its shelf. Tomorrow night I'd give Gary Thompson the benefit of the doubt. I'd ask about his business, his plans for the future, his intentions toward Judy. I'd be the father-in-law he expected, not the suspicious businessman I'd become. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 10:30. Time for bed, though I doubted sleep would come easily. I turned off the study lights and headed upstairs, already planning conversation topics for tomorrow's dinner. Common ground, shared interests, the kind of foundation you build relationships on. If Gary was going to be family, I'd find a way to make it work. I stood before my bedroom mirror, adjusting my tie for the 3rd time. The navy blue silk had been Helen's favorite. She'd given it to me for our 20th anniversary, claiming it brought out my eyes. Tonight felt important enough for Helen's tie, important enough for the good cufflinks, and the cologne I saved for special occasions. 7:15. I'd planned to arrive exactly on time, not early enough to seem anxious, not late enough to appear dismissive. Angelo's on Rush Street was Gary's choice, an upscale Italian place that probably cost more for one meal than I used to spend on groceries for a week. But if this was Gary's way of impressing me, I'd play along. I checked my wallet, credit cards, cash, business cards in case the conversation turned professional. My phone showed no new messages from Judy since yesterday's dinner confirmation. No last-minute changes, no anxious texts asking me to be nice to Gary. Maybe she trusted this would go well. Maybe she was just confident Gary could handle himself. The drive downtown would take 30 minutes in evening traffic. I grabbed my keys and headed for the garage, mentally rehearsing conversation starters. Ask about his business, not the vague, disruptive technology nonsense, but specifics. Revenue streams, client base, growth projections, the kind of questions that revealed whether someone actually understood their own venture. Sports might be safer ground. The Cubs were having a decent spring training. The Bulls were rebuilding again. Neutral topics that didn't require personal revelation or professional scrutiny. Though Gary struck me as more of a golf conversation type, expensive courses, exclusive clubs, the kind of networking that happened over 18 holes. I backed out of the driveway, noting the evening light filtering through the oak trees, lining my street. April in Chicago meant hope, winter finally breaking, the promise of warmth ahead. Maybe that was what tonight represented too. New beginnings, family expansion, the natural progression of life that I'd been resisting. Helen would have loved planning a wedding. She'd have driven Judy crazy with menu tastings and flower arrangements, but in the best possible way. She'd have found common ground with Gary, drawn him into the family circle with her gift for making people feel welcome. I wasn't Helen, but I could try to channel her approach tonight. Traffic moved smoothly down the Eisenhower. I'd allowed extra time, so arriving a few minutes early wouldn't hurt. It might even give me a chance to observe Gary's interaction with the restaurant staff. How a man treated service workers told you everything about his character. My phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, keeping my focus on the road and the conversation ahead. Tonight was about building bridges, finding connection points with the man who wanted to marry my daughter. Whatever business call was coming in could wait. The Chicago skyline spread before me as I approached downtown, glass towers reflecting the setting sun. This was Gary's element, expensive restaurants, urban sophistication, the kind of lifestyle that came with money and ambition. Maybe that's what attracted Judy. After growing up in Oak Park's tree-lined suburban comfort, the city's energy probably felt exciting, full of possibility. I found parking 2 blocks from Angelo's and checked my appearance one final time in the rearview mirror. Gray hair neatly combed, tie straight, jacket pressed. I looked like what I was, a successful businessman meeting his future son-in-law for dinner. Professional but warm. Interested but not invasive. The evening air carried the scent of early spring as I walked toward the restaurant. In 2 hours, I'd know whether Gary Thompson was worthy of my daughter's love and my financial investment. Tonight would set the tone for whatever relationship we'd build going forward. Time to find out what kind of man wanted to join our family. Angelo's hostess guided me through the main dining room toward a private area in the back. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over white tablecloths, and the soft murmur of conversation created an atmosphere of expensive sophistication. I straightened my shoulders, ready to make the effort this evening required. The private dining room held a table for 8, already occupied except for one empty chair. Gary stood as I approached, but his smile never reached his eyes. "Ah, here's our generous sponsor," he announced to the table, his voice carrying just enough volume to ensure everyone heard. The other guests, Gary's sister, 2 business associates, and an older couple I didn't recognize, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Judy shot Gary a warning look, but he ignored it completely. "Gary," I extended my hand, determined to start fresh. "Thank you for organizing this dinner." He gripped my hand just a little too firmly. "Of course, especially when you have such deep pockets for wedding expenses." I took my seat, noting how Gary had positioned himself at the head of the table, like he was hosting rather than joining. The waiter poured wine while I studied the faces around me. Gary's sister looked embarrassed. His business associates seemed practiced in ignoring his behavior. "So, Alton," Gary continued, settling back into his chair with obvious satisfaction, "Judy tells me you're retired. Must be nice to have so much free time on your hands." "I stay busy enough." I kept my voice level, professional. "What about your business ventures? Judy mentioned you're working on something innovative." "Several projects, actually. You wouldn't understand the technology." He waved dismissively. "It requires a certain kind of forward thinking that your generation struggles with." Judy reached across the table toward Gary. "He didn't mean—" "I meant exactly what I said." Gary's attention never left my face. Some people get stuck in old ways of thinking. Real estate, traditional investments, safe but boring. The older couple at the table exchanged glances. Gary's sister concentrated intensely on her salad, clearly wishing she were anywhere else. "Traditional approaches have their merits," I replied carefully. "Stability, proven track records, actual revenue streams." "Revenue streams," Gary laughed, but the sound held no humor. "How wonderfully predictable. Tell me, did you ever take any real risks in your business, or did you just buy and sell houses like everyone else?" Heat crept up my neck, but I maintained my composure. "Every business involves calculated risks. The key is understanding the difference between opportunity and speculation. Spoken like a true conservative. Gary raised his wine glass in mock salute. No wonder Judy needed to find someone with actual vision for her future. Judy's face flushed red. Gary, please. This is supposed to be a celebration. It is a celebration. We're celebrating Judy's escape from limited thinking. He leaned back, clearly enjoying himself. Though I suppose we should be grateful for the financial support, even if it comes with outdated advice. I felt my jaw tighten, but forced my voice to remain steady. I'm here because I care about Judy's happiness. I hope we can find common ground. Common ground. Gary repeated the phrase like it tasted bitter. You mean the ground where you approve of my choices and I pretend to respect your opinions? The waiter appeared with our entrees, providing a momentary distraction. But Gary wasn't finished. He cut into his steak with theatrical precision, the knife scraping against the plate. Actually, Alton, I've been thinking about our family dynamic going forward. Some boundaries might be necessary. Gary's wine glass was already half empty when the main course arrived. The alcohol had loosened whatever restraint he'd been maintaining, and his eyes held a predatory gleam that made my skin crawl. You know what I've realized tonight? Gary announced, loud enough to attract attention from nearby tables. Family dinners work best when everyone knows their place. Judy's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Gary, maybe we should... No, let me finish. He held up his hand like he was conducting an orchestra. Your father seems confused about his role in our upcoming marriage. I set down my knife carefully, feeling the familiar stillness that preceded important business negotiations. I'm not sure I understand. Oh, I think you do. Gary leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that somehow felt more threatening than shouting. See, there's something we need to clarify about the wedding. The table fell silent. Even Gary's usually chatty sister stopped eating, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Gary straightened up, his voice returning to full volume. Listen, old man, you're not expected at the wedding tomorrow. The words hit like a physical blow. Around the table, I heard sharp intakes of breath, the clink of silverware being set down too quickly. That's unacceptable. Judy's voice cracked with shock and anger. Gary, you can't just... Actually, I can. Gary's satisfaction was palpable. It's our wedding, Judy. We get to decide who belongs there and who doesn't. Gary, stop this right now. Judy's hands shook as she reached toward him. This is my father we're talking about. Yes, your father, who's been questioning my every move since the moment we met. Gary turned back to me, his smile razor sharp. Judy, your father is ruining our evening again. I stared at him across the table, processing the calculated cruelty of the moment. This wasn't a spontaneous outburst. It was a planned humiliation, performed in front of witnesses to establish dominance. The other guests sat frozen, eyes averted like they were witnessing a car accident. Gary's sister had her hand pressed to her mouth. One of his business associates was studying his wine glass with intense fascination. I see. I folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate with deliberate precision. Thank you for clarifying the situation. Dad, please don't. Judy started to stand, but Gary's hand on her wrist stopped her. Let him go, sweetheart. Some people can't handle honest communication. I stood slowly, my movements controlled despite the rage building in my chest. 40 years of business meetings had taught me when to fight and when to withdraw strategically. This wasn't the time or place for a confrontation. Judy, I looked directly at my daughter, ignoring Gary completely. I love you. That will never change. Daddy, please, we can work this out. Tears gathered in her eyes, but she didn't pull away from Gary's grip. Call me when you're ready to talk. Really talk. I reached for my wallet, but Gary waved dismissively. Don't worry about the check, Alton. I've got it covered. Of course he did. With my money, filtered through Judy's account. I walked toward the exit with measured steps, nodding politely to the hostess, maintaining the dignity Gary had tried to strip away. Behind me, I heard Judy's voice, rising in argument, Gary's responses growing more defensive. The cool night air hit my face as I stepped onto Rush Street. The city hummed around me. Traffic, distant music, the laughter of people enjoying their Friday evening. Normal people with normal problems. I retrieved my car from the valet, tipped appropriately, and sat behind the wheel for a moment, before starting the engine. My hands weren't shaking, my breathing was steady, but something fundamental had shifted inside me. Gary Thompson had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The steering wheel felt solid under my grip as I pulled away from the restaurant. Traffic moved slowly through downtown Chicago, giving me time to process what had just happened. Red lights became opportunities to replay Gary's words, to analyze the calculated cruelty behind his public humiliation. My phone buzzed with a call. Judy's name appeared on the display, but I let it ring through to voicemail. We both needed time to process this evening before any meaningful conversation could happen. The city streamed past my windows, glass towers reflecting streetlights, pedestrians hurrying toward their Friday night destinations, the ordinary rhythm of urban life continuing, while my world had fundamentally shifted. I'd walked into that restaurant believing diplomacy could bridge any gap. I'd left knowing that Gary Thompson was something more dangerous than a mere opportunist. At North Lake Shore Drive, I made an impulsive turn toward the waterfront instead of heading straight home to Oak Park. The familiar route to Montrose Harbor called to me, a place Helen and I used to visit when we needed to think through difficult decisions. I parked facing Lake Michigan, the dark waters stretching toward an invisible horizon. Chicago's skyline rose behind me, but ahead lay nothing but darkness and the distant sound of waves against the breakwater. This was where I came when business deals went wrong, when difficult choices needed to be made. Gary's behavior tonight hadn't been about wedding guest lists or family dynamics. It had been a display of power, a public demonstration that he controlled Judy completely. The way he'd gripped her wrist, the satisfaction in his voice when she defended him despite his cruelty, these weren't the actions of a man in love. I'd spent 40 years reading people across conference tables. The desperate ones talked too much. The dishonest ones deflected questions with aggression. The truly dangerous ones enjoyed causing pain. Gary Thompson enjoyed causing pain. My phone buzzed again. This time I checked the voicemail from Judy's earlier call. Dad, I'm so sorry. Gary had too much wine and he's stressed about the wedding expenses. He didn't mean what he said. Please call me back. We need to fix this. She was making excuses for him, already rewriting tonight's events to make Gary the victim of circumstances, rather than the architect of deliberation cruelty. I'd seen this pattern in business. People so invested in bad decisions, they'd rationalize anything to avoid admitting their mistake. But this wasn't business. This was my daughter's life. I stared out at the lake, remembering Helen's advice during our own parenting challenges. Sometimes protecting them means letting them make mistakes, but sometimes it means stepping in, even when they hate you for it. The question was, which situation was this? Gary's defensive aggression suggested someone with secrets worth protecting. His vague business descriptions, his expensive lifestyle with no visible income, his immediate hostility toward anyone asking questions. These weren't the patterns of legitimate success. I started the engine and pulled back onto Lakeshore Drive, heading toward Oak Park with new purpose. Protecting Judy might require methods that went beyond fatherly concern. It might require the same investigation skills that had made me successful in real estate, the ability to research, to ask the right questions, to uncover what people preferred to keep hidden. By the time I reached my driveway, the decision was made. I wouldn't wait for Gary to destroy my daughter's life from within. I wouldn't hope that love would somehow overcome obvious warning signs. Starting tomorrow, I'd find out exactly who Gary Thompson really was. The lakefront wedding venue sparkled under the afternoon sun, its floor-to-ceiling windows framing Lake Michigan's endless blue expanse. White flowers cascaded from every available surface, and a string quartet played softly near the dance floor, where Judy moved like a vision in her flowing gown. She looked radiant, genuinely happy, completely unaware of the storm approaching her perfect day. I adjusted my tie and stepped through the entrance, noting the layout with a businessman's eye for tactical advantage. The reception hall stretched along the waterfront, with multiple exits and clear sight lines, perfect for what was coming. It had been a long night. After leaving the lake last evening, I'd spent hours working my network of contacts, following paper trails and making strategic phone calls. 23 calls, to be exact. The 24th had connected me with Curtis Blackwell, and everything had fallen into place with the precision of a well-executed deal. Gary held court near the bar, gesturing grandly with a champagne flute, surrounded by admirers who hung on his every word about disruptive technologies and revolutionary market approaches. His expensive tuxedo fit perfectly, probably paid for with someone else's money. The confident smile, the casual way he accepted congratulations, he truly believed he'd won yesterday's confrontation. I positioned myself at the back of the venue, near the service entrance Curtis would use when he arrived. From here I could observe everything while remaining inconspicuous. The irony wasn't lost on me, standing in the shadows at my own daughter's wedding, waiting to destroy her husband's life. Wedding guests mingled with the casual elegance money could buy. I recognized some faces from Gary's dinner party, others from Judy's college years. They laughed and clinked glasses, celebrating what they believed was a love story. None of them suspected they were attending the final act of an elaborate fraud. My phone buzzed with a text from Curtis. "Parking now. Legal papers ready. Give me 5 minutes." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Curtis would enter during the height of celebration when Gary felt most secure and had the largest audience. Public humiliation served justice better than private confrontation. Gary had chosen to embarrass me in front of witnesses. Now he'd discover how it felt to be exposed when it mattered most. Judy spun across the dance floor, her dress flowing like water, her smile bright enough to power the venue's chandeliers. For a moment, my resolve wavered. This was her wedding day, the moment she'd dreamed about since childhood. Was I about to destroy her happiness to satisfy my need for justice? Then I remembered Gary's words from last night. "Your father is ruining our evening." The calculating cruelty, the public dismissal, the way he'd gripped Judy's wrist when she tried to defend me. This wasn't about my wounded pride. It was about protecting my daughter from a predator who saw her as a means to an end. Gary's laughter carried across the room as he told some story to his captive audience. He gestured toward the lake, probably taking credit for choosing such an expensive venue. Everything about him was performance, from his practiced charm to his borrowed confidence. The string quartet transitioned into something lighter, more celebratory. Guests gathered around the newlyweds for photographs, smartphones capturing what they thought was pure joy. In a few minutes, those same phones would be recording something entirely different. I checked my watch. Curtis should be walking through the entrance any moment. Gary continued his performance, completely unaware that his past was about to collide with his present in spectacular fashion. Across the room, Gary's gaze swept the crowd, basking in the attention, reveling in his temporary triumph. Then his eyes found mine. His champagne glass stopped halfway to his lips. The confident smile flickered and died. Gary's face transformed from celebration to fury in the space of a heartbeat. He thrust his champagne glass at the nearest guest and began cutting through the crowd with predatory focus, his expensive tuxedo making him look like a shark in formal wear. Conversation stopped as he pushed past dancing couples and chattering groups. The string quartet played on, but the wedding atmosphere shifted as guests sensed impending confrontation. Judy looked up from her photographs, confusion clouding her radiant features. "What are you doing here?" Gary's voice boomed across the reception hall, cutting through music and laughter like a blade. "You weren't invited yesterday." The words echoed off the glass walls, carrying to every corner of the venue. The string quartet faltered into silence. Guests turned toward us with expressions ranging from shock to fascination, smartphones instinctively rising to capture whatever drama was unfolding. I remained calm, hands clasped behind my back, watching Gary's public meltdown with professional detachment. This was exactly what I'd hoped for, his arrogance on full display for everyone to witness. "Gary, please!" Judy started toward us, her wedding dress rustling urgently. "No!" He held up a trembling hand, alcohol and rage making his voice crack. "This man disrespected me, disrespected our relationship, and now he shows up uninvited to ruin our wedding." "I'm leaving," I said quietly, my voice carrying despite its controlled volume. "But first, let me introduce you to my special guest." I gestured toward the entrance, where Curtis Blackwell had just appeared with perfect timing. "I believe you know your old friend." Curtis Blackwell commanded attention the moment he entered. Tall, silver-haired, wearing a charcoal suit that screamed serious money, he carried himself with the authority of someone accustomed to boardrooms and high-stakes negotiations. His briefcase looked expensive and official. Gary's aggressive posture crumbled as recognition dawned. His face went white, then gray, all color draining away like water from a broken basin. "Gary Thompson?" Curtis's voice carried the crisp authority of courtrooms and corporate takeovers. "I finally found you." Wedding guests murmured in confusion, sensing something significant, but unable to understand what they were witnessing. Gary stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly like a fish gasping for air. Curtis approached with measured steps, each footfall echoing in the suddenly quiet reception hall. He opened his briefcase with practiced efficiency and withdrew a thick stack of legal documents. "Gary Thompson, you are hereby served with legal papers, demanding repayment of $1,200,000, plus accumulated interest and legal fees, which you fraudulently obtained from Blackwell Venture Capital under false pretenses." The words fell like hammer blows. Gary's hands shook as Curtis pressed the papers into them, but he seemed unable to process what was happening. His carefully constructed world was collapsing in real time, in front of everyone who mattered to his new life. Judy gasped, her bouquet falling from nerveless fingers. $1 million? Gary, what is he talking about? Wedding guests pressed closer, no longer pretending polite disinterest. Cell phones captured every moment as Gary stared at the legal documents, like they were written in a foreign language. 2 years, Curtis continued, his voice carrying throughout the silent hall. 2 years I've been looking for you, Mr. Thompson. You disappeared with my money, left a trail of forged documents, and thought you could reinvent yourself with someone else's daughter. Gary's knees buckled slightly. He gripped the papers with white knuckles, his wedding day confidence evaporating like morning mist. The man who'd humiliated me less than 24 hours ago now looked like a cornered animal. "Gary!" Judy's voice cracked with growing horror. "Is this true? Did you steal money?" But Gary couldn't answer. He stood paralyzed, holding proof of his crimes, while his new bride and her wedding guests watched his careful facade crumble into dust. Gary's hands trembled as he read the court summons, his eyes darting across the legal language that spelled out his financial ruin. The elegant wedding venue had become a courtroom, with 150 guests serving as jury to witness his complete destruction. $1,200,000 plus interest, he whispered, the numbers seeming to physically wound him. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the lakefront breeze flowing through the open windows. His expensive tuxedo suddenly looked like a costume, a prop in a performance that had finally been exposed. Wedding guests pushed closer, their celebration forgotten in favor of the unfolding drama. Smartphones recorded every moment of Gary's breakdown, capturing his transformation from confident groom to exposed criminal. The string quartet stood frozen with their instruments, unsure whether to continue playing for a party that no longer existed. Curtis observed Gary's reaction with professional satisfaction. "Alton, thank you," he said, extending his hand toward me. "I've been searching for this man for 2 years. Your business contacts proved invaluable in tracking him down." "Justice needed to be served," I replied simply, shaking his hand. The words carried weight in the silent reception hall, explaining everything and nothing to the confused wedding guests. Judy stood paralyzed in her wedding gown, bouquets scattered at her feet like broken dreams. "Gary, please tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't steal money from people." But Gary couldn't speak. The court papers shook in his grip as he read details of forged documents, phantom companies, and elaborate schemes that had funded his lavish lifestyle. Every expensive dinner, every designer suit, every romantic gesture, all paid for with stolen money. "The wedding," Judy whispered, realization dawning in her voice. "The venue, the flowers, my dress. Where did the money come from?" Gary's silence answered everything. His carefully constructed identity was disintegrating in real time, leaving behind only the truth of what he really was, a common thief who'd used my daughter's love as cover for his criminal activities. Curtis closed his briefcase with a decisive snap. "Mr. Thompson, you have 30 days to respond to this summons. I suggest you find a good attorney." He turned to me with genuine gratitude. Thank you again, Elton. The authorities will want to speak with you about how you located him. The wedding reception had completely collapsed around us. Guests gathered in shock clusters, whispers and pointed fingers replacing celebration and congratulations. The elegant lakefront venue, with its panoramic views and perfect flowers, had become the scene of public humiliation and criminal exposure. I looked at my daughter, still beautiful in her wedding dress, but now understanding that her marriage was built on lies and stolen money. The pain in her eyes cut deep, but beneath it I saw the first glimmers of recognition. Her father hadn't been trying to control her life, but to protect it. "Judy," I said softly, crossing to where she stood, frozen among the scattered flowers. "I'm sorry it had to happen this way." She looked up at me with eyes full of tears and confusion. You knew what he was." "I suspected. I investigated. I found Curtis." I touched her shoulder gently. Sometimes protecting the people we love means doing things they don't understand until later. Gary finally found his voice, but it came out as a broken whisper. "Judy, I can explain. This is all a misunderstanding. I was going to pay it back." "With what money?" Curtis interrupted coldly. "You have no legitimate business, no real income, no assets except what you've stolen from others." The truth hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. Gary's empire of lies had collapsed in less than 10 minutes, leaving nothing but legal papers and broken promises. Curtis and I walked toward the exit together, our business concluded. Behind us, the elegant wedding reception continued its transformation into something resembling a crime scene, complete with witnesses and evidence. Justice had been served with perfect timing and devastating effectiveness. The drive home felt different than any I'd taken before. Oak Park's familiar tree-lined streets seemed more peaceful, more settled, as if the neighborhood itself knew justice had been served. I pulled into my driveway and sat for a moment, reviewing the afternoon's events with the satisfaction of a businessman who just closed the most important deal of his career. Inside my house, the silence felt productive, rather than empty. I went straight to my home office, where wedding contracts and financial documents waited in neat stacks on my desk. Helen had always admired my organizational systems, everything filed, labeled, easily accessible for moments exactly like this. My first call went to First National's private banking line, where Margaret Henderson had handled my accounts for 15 years. "Mr. Stewart, how can I assist you today?" "Margaret, I need to stop a wire transfer scheduled for tomorrow. $50,000 to Fairmont Catering Services." "Of course. May I have the reference number?" I read the confirmation number from my notes, listening to her keyboard clicks as she located the transaction. "Found it. This was scheduled as final payment for wedding services. Shall I cancel the entire transfer?" "Yes. The contracts have been voided due to fraud discovery." "I'll handle that immediately. You'll receive written confirmation within 24 hours. The efficiency felt satisfying. No questions, no judgment, just professional service handling legitimate business needs. Next came the vendor calls, systematic, methodical, each conversation documented with the precision I'd used throughout my real estate career. The florist answered first. "Stuart Thompson, wedding?" "Oh my, we heard the reception ended quite abruptly. Is everything all right?" "The contracts are void due to fraud discovery. I'm stopping all payments effective immediately." Her tone shifted to business mode. "I see. Well, the flowers were delivered and displayed. We'll need to discuss partial payment for services rendered. Send me an itemized invoice. Address collection efforts to Gary Thompson." Each call followed the same pattern. The caterer expressed concern about the reception ending early. The band wanted to know about final payment for their 3-hour performance. The photographer asked about delivery of wedding photos. To each, I gave the same professional response. Fraud discovered. Contracts void. Pursue Gary Thompson for payment. By 7 o'clock, I'd completed 9 calls and stopped 6 different payment authorizations. The total financial impact would hit Gary and Judy with approximately $38,000 in immediate vendor bills, money that would have to come from somewhere other than my accounts. I felt a brief pang of concern for Judy. She'd wake up tomorrow, facing financial realities she'd never experienced, bills that her fraudulent husband couldn't pay with stolen money, but sometimes protecting people required letting them feel the consequences of their choices. My phone rang as I organized the final confirmation documents. Caller ID, Judy. I looked at the screen for a long moment, then let it ring through to voicemail. She needed time to understand what Gary really was before we could have any productive conversation. Tonight, she was probably still angry at me for ruining her wedding. Tomorrow, she might begin understanding that I'd saved her from something much worse. The phone rang again before I'd finished filing the banking confirmations. Judy's name appeared on the screen, disappeared when I didn't answer, then appeared again 3 minutes later. I moved to the kitchen and started preparing a simple dinner: grilled chicken breast, steamed vegetables, brown rice. Normal, methodical, peaceful. The phone rang twice more while I seasoned the chicken. In the living room, I settled into my favorite armchair with a cup of tea and the evening news. Chicago's mayor was discussing infrastructure improvements. The Cubs had won their home opener. Spring weather would continue through the week. The phone rang during the sports segment. Judy again. I sipped my tea and listened to the weather forecast, trying to remember if I'd planned any weekend projects that might be affected by potential rain. The garden needed attention, but that could wait until after this family crisis resolved itself. 15 minutes later, another call, then another. The pattern became predictable. Every 5 to 10 minutes, Judy's name would light up the screen. I found myself counting. Call 7 during the national news, call 8 during commercial break, call 9 when the local anchor returned. By 8:30, the count had reached 18. I switched to a documentary about Antarctic wildlife, finding the penguin colonies more peaceful than the drama playing out through my phone. Even the harsh realities of survival in nature seemed simpler than human relationships. Call 23 came during footage of leopard seals hunting. Call 24 interrupted information about ice shelf formations. I refilled my tea and adjusted my reading glasses, settling in for what promised to be a long evening. The documentary ended at 9:15. Call count, 31. I channel surfed briefly, settling on a British mystery series Helen had enjoyed. The detective was questioning suspects in a country manner, each person hiding secrets that would eventually surface. Art imitating life, with better dialogue and more civilized settings. Between 9:15 and 10 o'clock, 12 more calls came through. The desperation was palpable, even without answering. Shorter intervals between attempts, the phone barely silent before ringing again. Call 44 arrived at 10:07. I turned off the television and began my evening routine. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conversations, new opportunities for Judy to understand why her father had acted with such apparent cruelty. Tonight, she was learning that actions had consequences, that fraudulent husbands came with unexpected costs, that independence required more than just declaring it. In the bathroom, I brushed my teeth, while the phone remained blessedly silent for almost 8 minutes. Call 45 interrupted me while I was changing into pajamas. By the time I turned off the lights and settled into bed, Judy had called 44 times in 3 hours. I switched the phone to silent mode and placed it face down on the nightstand. She would need to solve this crisis herself, without her father's financial rescue. Sometimes the most loving thing a parent could do was refuse to answer the phone. 3 weeks later, I sat in the Cook County Courthouse, watching Gary Thompson receive his sentence. The man who'd confidently humiliated me at dinner now looked 20 years older, his expensive suits replaced by county jail orange, his arrogant demeanor crushed by the weight of multiple felony convictions. The defendant will serve 18 months in state prison and pay full restitution of $1,400,000 to the victims identified in this case, Judge Martinez announced with professional finality. Curtis leaned over from the bench beside me. 14 victims total. The investigation uncovered much more than just my case. Gary had built an entire criminal enterprise on charm and borrowed credibility. Investment schemes, fake partnerships, forged documents. The scope of his fraud made my daughter's narrow escape seem even more fortunate. Outside the courthouse, Curtis shook my hand with genuine gratitude. I never would have found him without your business connections, Alton. Thank you for calling me that night. Justice needed to be served, I replied, the same words I'd used at Judy's wedding. They still felt appropriate. Curtis walked toward his car, briefcase full of restitution paperwork that would eventually recover most of his stolen money. I stood on the courthouse steps, watching Chicago's afternoon traffic flow past, wondering if my daughter was ready to rebuild our relationship. That evening, I finally called her. "Dad?" Her voice sounded different, older, more cautious, but without the defensive anger I'd expected. "Hello, sweetheart. I thought it was time we talked. I've been waiting for you to call." A pause. "I learned about the other victims. 14 people, Dad. Gary stole money from 14 different people." "I know. I attended his sentencing today." "You were there?" Another pause, longer this time. "I should have been there too, but I couldn't face seeing him again." "You don't need to face him ever again. The vendors have been calling constantly. The bills, the canceled payments. I understand now what you did and why." Her voice caught slightly. "I'm sorry, I didn't listen to your concerns about Gary." "Come home for dinner tomorrow," I said. "We have a lot to discuss." The next evening, Judy arrived at 6 o'clock sharp, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing the kind of practical business clothes that suggested she was taking her career more seriously. She looked tired but stronger, like someone who'd survived a test and learned important lessons. "You saved me from becoming victim number 15, she said as we sat down to dinner. "I protected my daughter. That's what fathers do." Even when their daughters are too stubborn to appreciate it, she raised her wine glass, to wisdom gained through hardship. We talked until nearly midnight about trust, independence, financial responsibility, and the difference between supporting someone and enabling their mistakes. Judy had spent 3 weeks discovering what life was like without her father's safety net, and the experience had taught her more about self-reliance than any lecture could have managed. "I'm going to pay you back," she said as we cleared the dinner plates. "Every dollar from the vendors, from the wedding expenses, everything. It might take a while, but I'll pay it all back." "Keep your money," I told her. "Consider it tuition for one of life's most important lessons." She hugged me then, really hugged me, for the first time since before she'd met Gary Thompson. Justice had been served, family bonds had been tested and strengthened, and my daughter had emerged wiser, more independent, and finally safe from the charming predator who'd almost destroyed her life. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.